What is the first ever H.P. Lovecraft movie adaptation? That's actually something of a philosophical question. We have four main contenders essentially today for the first H.P. Lovecraft adaptation, but it's actually, it's a lot thornier than we would think. And a lot of that, and a lot of the answer depends on what we actually mean by, adaptation. So anyway, I had just a bit of a warning before starting the actual video. I had actually planned, like in my plan before me, had included TV series, had included vinyl records, a lot of that. It was actually a much wider discussion, but that other stuff I'm going to be saving for another video because otherwise this might get a little too long as a video, a bit too deep for today. So we'll leave that for part two. Let me know if you're interested in seeing it, but for now, let's begin. Okay. There's one candidate that is non-controversial. Everybody can agree that this is an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation, and in many ways, you could say it's the first one. It's 1965, the Die Monster Die from 1965. Directed by Daniel Haller and starring Boris Karloff in a wheelchair. This is one of two H.P. Lovecraft adaptations starring Boris Karloff in a wheelchair. The second one is The Crimson Altar, Curse of the Crimson Cult or something like that. Also has Christopher Lee. Now, it's a very iffy adaptation. It strays a lot from the original story, but it's actually a lot better than this one. I like it a lot more. Also has Barbara Steele. It came out in 1968, I think. This one, Die Monster Die, it has a lot of things going against it. I usually always look for the positive in whatever I'm watching and when I make these videos, but I have to say, there are cool things, there are plenty of cool things in Die Monster Die, but you can tell that Boris Karloff is in a lot of physical pain. Actually, I always wondered what his main health issues were and why he was in a wheelchair, and apparently it was for back pain. That seems to be the main reason. It was why he had a problem walking, and if you've had back pain, it can get quite excruciating, and you do get the sense watching the movie in a lot of in the shots that Karloff is in physical, a lot of discomfort. Essentially, he doesn't look well. He doesn't look, he doesn't have that smooth, powerful screen presence, that innate charisma that he had, like all the way in all the 30s movies. And I usually like Boris Karloff is actually very underrated as an actor, but here he's okay. Has a couple of good scenes, but how is it as an adaptation? Well, it's an adaptation of Color Out of Space, and it has some stuff that's pretty close to the story. Mainly, there's one shot in particular where our hero, who's played by Nick Adams, he's walking through the famous blasted heath. That shot is amazing. It's straight out of the story, very powerful, great shot. But generally speaking, there's a couple of elements in the story, in the movie, which involve mutations in the greenhouse. So that's pretty close to the spirit of the story, of the tale. That's cool. The monsters we see once we finally broach that cursed door of the greenhouse, those are cool. But all in all, by the end of the movie, we have encountered some Lovecraftian gods, and Boris Karloff, for some reason, is a scientist, but he also worships the evil ones, and so as you do. But by the end of it, they end up changing like the nature of the color out of space. It still comes from an asteroid, but I won't spoil it, but they do change some things, and it ends up being mostly a standard monster movie, if you like. So the ethos is different. It's not really cosmic horror. It's more standard, standard 1950s fare, 1960s fare, and yeah, it has cool stuff, but it really doesn't work as a movie. I don't think so. I mean, plenty of people like it. There are some cool stuff in it, but it's just it's just not for me. I'm not a big Nick Adams fan. Also, like I enjoy the films he's in, like even like the Green Slime, stuff like that. I like those movies, right? But he has a quality as a screen presence which I just don't like. Okay. So anyway, Die Monster Die is the first, but it's the first adaptation because this one is explicitly described in the credits as an H.P. Lovecraft adaptation, like nothing more, nothing less, based on a story by H.P. Lovecraft. And so there's no controversy here. That one is a Lovecraft movie. But there is one before that. Okay. Three actually, but like there's one just before that. Die Monster Die was done in released in October of 1965. Like the premiere was on October 27th. But a few months before that, and on July 14th, 1965, there was a TV movie. Okay, and this one is interesting because, first of all, should we include TV movies in our list of movie adaptations? Do TV movies count? It depends a lot on what you consider an actual movie, But like in the Phil Hardy Overlook Film Encyclopedia, for instance, usually TV movies aren't included as quote-unquote movies unless they had a cinema release, like for instance, like the Incredible Hulk movie from the 70s had a release in Europe. Same thing for the Galactica and the 1978 Galactica premiere. I actually saw that in the drive-thru theater when I was a small kid. It was pretty cool. And yeah, so, but if we do include TV movies, and if I do make the other video, there's more TV stuff to be discovered, though they are later. I will say this, like in 1965, let us say we include TV movies. Well, there's a TV movie called Dark Intruder, which you might have heard of, which was a failed TV pilot. It lasts about an hour. It stars Leslie Nielsen as an occult detective. There are a lot of those. I'm always quite amazed at the number of occult detectives that one finds in comic books and novels and TV shows and movies. Quite a booming industry. The occult detective work. But here, so we have a Sherlock Holmes type of character, except he's in 19th century San Francisco, so that's interesting. And so Leslie Nielsen, he's very smart, he's very well versed in the occult mysteries, and one of his friends, who's played by, I think, the guy who played Gary Seven in that Star Trek episode, which was also a failed backdoor pilot, the one where they traveled to the 1960s, the one with Terry Garr. Well, yeah, so he plays like the time traveler in that, and he plays a friend of Leslie Nielsen who who has reason to believe he's actually a sort of Dr. Jekyll / demonically possessed type of character. So his best friend, Leslie Nielsen's best friend, might be turning into a horrible, monstrous fiend. And that's not very Lovecraftian, but amazingly, about like 10 minutes in, our detective, he's looking at a bunch of statues. And so he goes, this is much too primitive to be like voodoo, Haitian voodoo statues. And this is, it can't be an Egyptian sculpture for such and such reason. But then he says, and I quote here, There are some religions in the Hogar regions, the Crimson Desert, Azathoth, Dagon, yeah? And so ... ends there. So that's it. But lo and behold, we have heard ushered from the mouth of our occult detective in 1965, Azathoth and Dagon. So Dagon is, I think he's even in the Old Testament, like he's a historical god, so might be that, but there's no mistaking Azathoth. Anyway, so and even like the Crimson Desert and the Hogar region, this is actually learned this online. I wasn't aware of this, but this comes from a Lovecraft revision, in fact, of an Adolphe de Castro story, namely The Last Test. There's more. I mean, I'll put the link in the description of the video. There's an excellent blog post on lovecraftzine.com that talks about this movie, goes into a lot of detail, because there's also there's a reference to Nyarlathotep in the in Dark Intruder. So Nyarlathotep, I know him from the Call of Cthulhu rule book. He's one of the gods, but he's an invention by Henry Kuttner from the Salem horror story. So yeah, so basically there are a few very esoteric, very obscure, even more obscure than that references. But the core, the main reference, and the only real reference actually to Lovecraft in the story is that Azathoth quote, and if you like the reference to Dagon and the Hogar region and the Crimson Desert. However, even though that's taken from a Lovecraft story, this is not an adaptation of that tale at all. It's just the first known instance in a TV show of somebody using the elder gods and putting them in the story in a fashion that's quite common in literature among not only the Lovecraft circle, but plenty of people have done it. It's kind of a tradition to include the Lovecraft gods in your stories. And in movies, you see a lot of that. And if you include books like the Necronomicon, that has appeared in even more movies, like the most famously the Evil Dead series. But all that, those are more like winks and fun references, geeky references, which sets the story somewhat in the Lovecraft, orbit, but it's not even really in the same type of universe. The other gods are mentioned, they're basically demons and creatures, evil spiritual entities from the Judeo-Christian tradition, and Azazel and stuff like that, right? So anyway, it's not based on a story, on a narrative. It's only a couple of details. The gods are mentioned. So is it a Lovecraft adaptation? Well, if you count that as a Lovecraft adaptation, then Dark Intruder, which is also a TV movie, so if you include that as well, that did come before Die Monster Die. But yeah, it's not as strong a candidate, except there's one before that. So this one, what's interesting is this one is 1963's The Haunted Palace by Roger Corman, and the full title is actually Edgar Allan Poe's Haunted Palace. Now, I mentioned that Die Monster Die I don't like very much. I have tried 3 times to like it. So far I have failed. But Haunted Palace, I love that movie. And officially, it is the first Lovecraft adaptation, in as much as Lovecraft is mentioned in the credits, like the opening titles, based on a story by H.P. Lovecraft. Except you might have noted a subtle hint in the title, a little detail, which is it's called an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation. Edgar Allan Poe's Haunted Palace. And what is this movie? Well, this is an adaptation of Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward. I think the character is actually called, Charles Dexter Ward. All those characters are basically named the same, and you will recognize most of the story beats. You have the ancestor, and he's doing nefarious experiments with immortality, and he's also a worshipper of the elder gods. But the village destroy him, they kill him, they burn him at the stake, and as one does when one is an evil sorcerer burned at the stake, one curses the village. You curse the descendants, and eventually you come back. 100 years later, he will possess his ancestor who has come back to take possession of the old family home, and and both the ancestor and the descendant are Charles Dexter Ward are played by Vincent Price, and he's very good in this. He plays both roles, obviously, as I said, and he's excellent in both, quite different in both instances. We also have, incidentally, a very nice turn by Lon Chaney Jr., who is often, he drank a lot. This is not to be disparaging, but he was a famous, sadly, he was a famous, quite heavy drinker, Lon Chaney Jr., and that often reflected in his performances. You could usually tell that he was quite heavily drunk, and they would shoot all his dialogue in the morning, because by noon he would just slur his lines because he was so inebriated. But the fact I mentioned all this because he's really good in this. He plays like the henchman, the evil henchman. But I'm usually not. I have some affection for Lon Chaney because of the Universal movies, but I've never been like a fan of his. And he's actually really excellent. So he does a great performance. The cast is great through and through. But yeah. I mentioned the Roger Corman and Edgar Allan Poe connection. So is this the first Lovecraft adaptation? In a sense, well, in most senses, actually, it is. And because it's clearly an adaptation of Charles Dexter Ward, and it would probably have been called H.P. Lovecraft's Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward instead of Edgar Allan Poe's Haunted Palace, except for the fact that this is obviously a film that was made in the later years of Roger Corman's famous Edgar Allan Poe cycle, Tombs of Ligeia and House of Usher and all these movies, Pit of the Pendulum, Mask of the Red Death, etc. You know those movies, which are very cool. And Edgar Allan Poe at that time was a much bigger household name, and the powers that be at AIP decided that they would sell more tickets if they hoodwinked the public into believing this was based on a Poe story or poem, in this case a poem. And I will say this, I did track down a copy online of Haunted Palace by Edgar Allan Poe, and I read it. It's very short, it's like a page or two, and it has nothing at all to do with the movie, with the movie. It has nothing. There is a palace involved, like a manor, and that's obviously why they picked that title. But that's it. I mean, it has palace in the title, and there's a mansion in the movie, so that's why they picked it. That said, this is a fantastic first official, semi-official adaptation of a Lovecraft story. Roger Corman is truly a superlative director. I mean, he's a commercial director. He's a specialist of like exploitation cinema, so he uses tricks and he pads out his movies. They're not exactly what you could call works of art, but they're pretty damn close. And he has a level of understanding of film craft which is really astounding. Like there's an interview on the DVD which you can find on YouTube, like the interview where he describes how he shot this, and he describes how he used a different film stock to shoot this than the Edgar Allan Poe movies, because he wanted something that was less saturated, because that fit the tone of Lovecraft better. You know, it's so brilliant, the way he describes it, and really shows that there's a level of care in this, which is actually the main difference between this and Diamonds Should Die. And there is a Corman connection, because Diamonds Should Die was directed by, I think, the set designer of like the Poe movies, Corman's Poe movies. His name is Daniel Heller, as I said. And sometimes, like, Corman liked to give chances to people. That's one of the reasons he's so well loved in Hollywood. I mean, I've seen Jack Nicholson openly weeping on YouTube, like in interviews, because of how much he loves Corman, because of how grateful he feels. So that's, I think a lot of people felt that towards Corman. So he gave a chance to Hal to direct I Must Die. But you can also see the difference in competence as a director, and again, just how much of a powerful like artist and craftsman. Like Roger Corman really had a high level of mastery of the craftsmanship of filmmaking, and that really shows in it. So the short version is that the first semi-official, I mean, it's the first adaptation of a Lovecraft movie, which can't exactly hang that on its mantelpiece, because it's called an Edgar Allan Poe adaptation, and the name of the story isn't mentioned in the credits, and Lovecraft takes all the, like, Edgar Allan Poe takes all the credit officially. So is it the first real adaptation? Well, on paper it depends, but in real life, yeah. Okay. And it's really like, I love this movie. It's not a masterpiece, but not very far. Like, it's a very powerful first semi-official, mostly official entry. But there is one before that, which I finally watched, and the one before that is it's a Mexican movie. It's called I don't speak Spanish, so I won't even pretend I have the accent, but it's 1961's La Marca del Muerto, also called The Mark of Death, also called in English in an alternate edit, re-edited by the notorious Jerry Warren, also called Creature of the Walking Dead. So if you go read on Letterboxd, for instance, the description of the movie, it's kind of described as a mix between like a Frankenstein's monster is mentioned. Like it's a kind of mix between Frankenstein and maybe Dracula, and once again H.P. Lovecraft's case of Charles Dexter Ward. But I was kind of dubious. I wasn't that in a hurry to watch it for various reasons. But I did, like, a couple of weeks ago, and I had a great time. I watched the Mexican subtitled version, which is, because from what I hear, like, the American Jerry Warren version is really awful. Apparently it's not very good. So, but in the Mexican version, is it a Lovecraft adaptation? Well, it's a good question. And I still can't say for sure, but mostly yes, in the sense that, okay, it includes large elements, especially in the beginning, but throughout the movie, it includes the main story elements of, once again, Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward. So once again, and if you compare it with Haunted Palace, there are a lot of comparisons in terms of the story and how it's structured. It's very close. And so you have the ancestor once again, and once again he's evil, and he's doing these, experiments on kidnapping beautiful ladies and doing very nefarious, almost necrophilic, like experiments. And once again, he's burned at the stake, like the villagers raid his mansion, his haunted palace, and they burning at the stake. And once again, he curses everybody. And once again, 100 years later, his ancestor, who looks exactly like him, comes with his newlywed wife. So all that exactly the same as in the story. And he discovers the portrait of his ancestors, same as the story. He discovers the notes of his ancestor and his laboratory, and he ends up resuscitating his ancestor and more or less possessed by him. So, and all that is essentially like the first 20 minutes of Mark of Death, Marca del Muerto, and all that is really surprisingly close, actually, to what you would expect from a Strange Case of Charles Dexter Ward adaptation. After that, it's it looks like a Frankenstein, like a Universal Frankenstein movie. So the looks are great. Okay, it's surprisingly effective visually, but it plays like a Santo movie. And I like Santo movies a lot, but after the first 20 minutes, and even then, but after the initial setup, the descendant, like the young Dr. Malthus is his name here, so it's not Dr. Ward, it's Malthus, but people make decisions just because the scenario decides that they should make the decision at that time. Like, okay, so he's this young idealistic doctor, but he's going to start murdering people for the experiments just because. And not because he's possessed, but just because he's curious, because science, essentially. But as soon as that's done, 2 hours later, he has a discussion with his ancestor, the evil Dr. Malthus, and now he has rediscovered his conscience, and so he kind of, if you like, flip-flops between evil and good and remorseful and obsessed, but not in a skillful way. He just turns on a dime whenever the scenario needs a gruesome scene. So if they need a gruesome scene where somebody kills somebody, and the most efficient, the quickest way to get there is for him to do the evil deed, well, that's what we'll see in the scenario. And essentially that. If you've seen a few Santo movies, you will recognize a lot of the very broad brushstrokes that are used to paint this picture of curses and evil. But still, that 20 minutes is really very, very close to the Lovecraft story. And I don't think that's accidental. It's like Lovecraft, obviously, he used pretty common tropes at the end of the day, like basic, like he had his own spin on stuff, but meteorites coming down to Earth and causing mutations, or fish people, or ghosts, or zombies, or stuff like that. I mean, he didn't invent any of that, really. Those are common story elements in even 1930s science fiction. I'd be curious to know how far the idea of a medical zombie goes. Like, was he the first person, Lovecraft, to invent that. Like, he might have been among the first, but I wouldn't say that everybody who's done like a scientific zombie after Lovecraft is indebted to Lovecraft for that reason. I mean, I don't think that's what makes Lovecraft Lovecraft. I think even then he was just picking general ideas, or more or less in the consciousness, and he was putting his own spin on it based on his own philosophical, preoccupations, if you like, the whole cosmic horror thing, and that's what makes it a Lovecraft tale. So very often, in a couple of examples, I'll very quickly mention in a couple of minutes. I mean, you do get people who will. I'll say it now, actually. Like, if you look on IMDb, for instance, and you look at every movie that has the Lovecraft or Lovecraftian tag, which I did, you'll end up with a lot of movies. And again, a lot of them, as I mentioned, they just have tentacles in them. And there are plenty of movies that have tentacles in them, in large part because Lovecraft has become so ingrained in popular culture in the last couple of decades. But usually very often it's pretty far-fetched, and you will find a couple of earlier movies. For instance, there's a 1953 movie, I think it's called, 1953, called The Maze by William Cameron Menzies, and that one I did see. It's excellent, and I do feel that it has a very strong Lovecraft flavor. There is, again, an ancestor, there is a family curse, there is a mansion, there's a lot of very cool stuff. There's even something like a fishman, or hints that there may be a fishman. So The Maze is a very good surprise if you haven't seen it, and it definitely has a Lovecraftian flavor. A strong flavor, you'll recognize it, but I don't think it's really. My hypothesis for this one is that it's not intentional. It's just they play in the same waters, so to speak, and it's just this general like gothic tropes, that sort of, like horror, science fiction elements, just general preoccupations of the culture. So I think that's what's happening. It feels Lovecraftian in many ways, but I wouldn't put it in a Lovecraft adaptation. At least of real. I wouldn't count it as a real Lovecraft adaptation. And you'll even find a movie from 1936. Like, The Maze isn't based on anything Lovecraftian. Just feels like it. But I've seen people mention The Invisible Ray from 1936. Which I haven't seen. It's been on my list for a long time. And this is the one with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. And if you've seen Ed Wood, whatever you do, don't tell Bela Lugosi that he was great as Karloff's sidekick. Just a friendly warning. But I was really curious. I still haven't seen it, but I read the description of the movie, and apparently at least one person on IMDb flagged it as a Lovecraftian movie because there's an asteroid, a meteorite that falls and it causes mutations. So that's somewhat like very similar on that level to the premise of Die Monster Die, Color Out of Space. So if you choose to believe that this is deliberate, that the people who made The Invisible Ray had read Color Out of Space. I'm not sure when it was published, Color Out of Space, but not much before that, I think. Not much before 1936. And in Weird Tales, probably. I mean, I didn't check, but before this video, but yeah, maybe somebody had a copy for some reason, and if you choose to believe all these maybes, well, maybe you could convince yourself that this is a Lovecraft adaptation. But I think it's just a coincidence because, a meteor falls from the sky, there's radiation and causes mutation. It's pretty much like in the time travel robots, category of science fiction tropes. It's a very, very, very common story idea. Again, Lovecraft just used it to tell a very powerful tale filled with his own ideas and his own sensibility. And it's by far one of his best stories, like a true masterpiece on color space. But I don't think you could say Invisible Ray is an actual Lovecraft adaptation. However, it just goes to show you that it's not that easy to determine with any degree of certainty what is the first Lovecraft adaptation. How do we actually know if Invisible Ray is based on the story? Well, I don't think so. It's not very likely, but is it impossible? Well, I didn't check the date where the story was published, but maybe the person who wrote the screenplay was writing letters to Lovecraft. It's not completely impossible, but it's not likely, certainly. And what about The Maze? Well, it feels very Lovecraftian, but it's not based on a story. The elements that feel Lovecraftian are so much so Lovecraftian that you definitely see the resemblance, but it's not. I'm not even sure if the person who wrote the screenplay had read any Lovecraft stories, because he was 10 years dead essentially by that time, so a bit more than that, but he was still extremely obscure as a writer. So I think it's just this feels more like a coincidence, like it would be a stretch to include it. And in the case of Marca del Muerto, well, I think we just can't be sure for that same reason, because at the end of the day, these are common tropes. The palace and the villagers storming the castle and burning the wizard at the stake. It's been done. Other stories have that, and even coming back and haunting the descendant and with the painting, all that. It's not revolutionary stuff, but when it's all assembled like it is in the Lovecraft story, and again, that's also a complete masterpiece, Charles Dexter Ward. Well, it shapes into the story we recognize, the actual Charles Dexter Ward story, and we have that in Mark of Death. And I do think, I think they stole it. I think it was intentional. I think it's fair game. I don't fault them. I will not fault a 1950s, 1961. Yeah, I will not fault a 1960s. Almost Santo movie, Mexican science fiction movie, for stealing stuff from H.P. Lovecraft, which is what I think did happen, and I'm cool with it. And even more so because we have good reason to believe it is the first Lovecraft story. And the director of photography worked on a lot of the more famous Santo movies, so the resemblance isn't even that far-fetched. There is a strong affiliation between the two. So luchador movies and Lovecraft mingled together like the essential salts of poor experiments on your work desk. But so what was the first one? Well, probably Mark of Death from 1961, but the first official adaptation without any controversy is Die Monster Die from 1965, so that's clear-cut H.P. Lovecraft adaptation. And the first real true Lovecraft adaptation that doesn't turn to something else, which is really telling the whole story all the way through, and which does a really good job of it, and which is the undisputed champion of first H.P. Lovecraft movie adaptations. That one is 1963's Haunted Palace by Roger Corman, even if it has Edgar Allan Poe as the official source text material. So there you have it, and do let me know if you'd like the other one for TV shows. That's also interesting. There's there's a German show, there's a later French adaptation, and lots of cool stuff. So there you go. But until then, see you next time. Keep watching the skies, live, loving, and prosper. Life is cool. Take care.